So we can sit up beautifully and practice touching gratitude for, if we are at home alone, we can just practice gratitude for our own in and out breath. We can still breathe. If we are together with our family, friends, we can touch gratitude for their presence. And here I practice being grateful for my brothers and sisters who are still here. It's so precious that we're still on the path. I don't take it for granted. We'll start with 3 sounds of the bell. Come back to our breathing, come back to our body, and get in touch with the community within our own body. A community of millions of cells, and the community of our ancestors. So, dear respected Thay, dear ancestral teachers, dear brothers and sisters, dear community, Happy New Year. I just went for a walk up on the waterfall. It's not a waterfall right now, it's just a bunch of rocks with some dead grass and bushes. And I saw that because of the rain we had a few days ago, there are little sprouts coming up at the base of the dead weeds, some of the dead bushes. So actually they're not dead. In the root there's still life. And so I was smiling to the green sprouts that were coming up. And I could see the spring and the continuation of last year. Sometimes things seem so kind of difficult, challenging, and if we just read the news, we only nourish the despair in our heart, then we don't see the small weeds just coming up out of the ground. And that is like a reminder to me of the Dharma, And so I'd like for us to practice here. A Dhamma talk is not for the person sitting up here to just say things and then we listen politely and then we go away. But it's at least in my experience, it's a collective practice. When we sit listening to Thay, our teacher, give a talk, I see that when I'm sitting there and I'm just listening, that I'm also contributing. I'm nourishing Thay by my mindfulness of in and out breathing, by my upright posture. I'm not kind of like slumping, either just hanging out like, oh, let's see if he says something interesting. But I'm actually there in my body and I'm there with my mind present. So it's like a session of sitting meditation. But there's also a transmission going on. And that is not a transmission from somebody to somebody else, but it's a transmission that I try to see in the spirit of the teaching that we recite when we offer incense. Tonight we have a ceremony and Brother Ngokong will offer incense. And in that offering, we say the one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. That seems quite strange. Is there any information that gets passed between the one who bows and the one who is bowed to? They are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. So, when I was standing next to the waterfall, looking at the one of the chaparral plants sprouting up from the roots, I tried to get in touch with that teaching, to see that this body is empty and these sprouts are also empty. And so, is there perfect communication or not? Or is there something that gets lost? Is there like a distortion, like in a radio signal? And I knew that it was almost perfect, but there was a little bit of distortion. And that distortion was coming from my thinking. If I was not completely present with my step, if I started, as I did a few times during that walk, if I started to think about what will I say in the Dhamma talk, that I noticed that there's a break in the communication. There's a kind of distortion. And so I came back to my step. I came back to my breathing to reestablish perfect communication. And that perfect communication is not like when you get an A on your essay that you write for your English class or your Vietnamese class. You might get the A or A+. Your teacher says, perfect, 100%. And so when I was growing up, if I got an A on my paper, I thought, that's perfect communication. But somehow, I noticed that even though I could get an A on the paper, but I noticed that there was still pain and suffering that I caused for myself and that I caused for others, my loved ones. in my way of speaking, in my way of thinking. So somehow there was something not quite yet perfect. Or we could say that it's already perfect and suffering yet is there. In 2020, we've been locked down in our houses, in our apartments, and during that time we've reflected on how precious it would be just to be able to gather with our close friends, just to have a party on a Saturday night. Something that was so easy to do just a few months before suddenly became so difficult, so scary. And even here in Deer Park, we had some challenges. Recently we had 3 brothers who, two for sure, that got tested with COVID, and then one we think as well. And so we had to look and see how can we protect the community, because we have many elders here. And so not only outside the monastery, but also in the monastery, we had to look and see we had to bring a new kind of mindfulness to our daily life. So in Solidity Hamlet, almost all of the brothers ended up in a room by ourselves. And fortunately, because we did an online retreat in the fall, we had set up a special Wi-Fi system. And so even though the novices, most of them, they don't have any electronic device as part of their training, but we gave back an electronic device so that we could do sitting meditation online, and happiness meetings online, and even Dharma teacher meetings online. And so we still were able to find joy, even though each of us was in our room alone. We were able to get up and still have sitting meditation in the morning together on Zoom, and be able to just hang out and have tea. Like some brothers would get on the Zoom and just drink tea, even though they're in their room by themselves. They make a cup of tea, and then the other brother makes a cup of tea in their room, and they just hang out together, just like we normally do. So somehow we have that capacity, even though there's this difficult situation, to bring joy, to find a way to continue to nourish our relationships. And during that time, I looked deeply to see what is my aspiration for the coming year. And it was not very difficult to see. So I saw that my aspiration was to go deeper and to realize the preciousness of my relationships. And that's thanks to COVID-19, partly. The Buddha had a vision of an old man, a sick man, and a corpse, a dead man. And even though he was in the midst of his vital young life as a man, he saw that there's actually in this very body the nature to die, to grow old, to get sick. And now with the internet, with technology, we start to have the old ideas of our ancestors. What if we could live forever? What if we can hack mortality? What if we can find a way to survive beyond the death of this body? So the same issue that the Buddha was looking into is the same thing that informs our life today. We see that there's so many things that our ancestors would have just dreamed about having, like a pantry full of food. Thanks to Thay Phap Luu in Solidity Hamlet, we always have a pantry full of food. Whenever I want to cook pasta, I just open the cabinet and it's full of pasta. The rice pasta, egg noodles, wheat pasta. I open the cooler, there's boxes of tomatoes in the middle of the winter. There's celery, I can make trays and trays of shiitake mushrooms. In the past, if we traveled far from our family, we would dream of just being able to have a short conversation with our mom. And so when we could call on the telephone over a wire, then it's like, wow, even just once in a year, it's very expensive, but we called and can hear the voice of our mother. And now we're living in the year of Zoom. We can press a button and see not only our mother, but we can see our whole family on the screen. I see all of you on the screen. So even in the middle of a pandemic, we can still feel like a community. We can come up to Deer Park virtually and get in touch with the monastics, with the community, with our spiritual community, and then we can press end and go and have our dinner in our own house. So that is a source of happiness. And yet even amidst endless amounts of food, it seems, even with instant communication, we may not be happy. We still feel there's something lacking in our heart. I can listen to a sound of the bell. And we can breathe in and just get in touch with what is in our heart right now. This morning, after breakfast, I ran into Br Phap Luu, Brother Dharma Rain, and we were talking a little bit, and then I said, "Why don't you come in and have tea?" And I was very aware, it's so precious to have someone to have tea with. 2.5 weeks of quarantine, and I cannot drink tea with one of my brothers, and now I have a chance. I can sit and drink tea with Brother Dharma Rain. And Brother Phap Luu and I ordained at the same time in 2003, December 13th, 2003. And we sat for a few hours just drinking tea, and after the rain I went outside and I went to the waterfall to see if there was some water coming down. And I took some pictures. And so I had printed some pictures on the color printer and I put them around the room. And so I invited Phap Luu in and I said, you're my first, the first one to come into the gallery. I want you to critique these photos. And so we went from one photo to the other, just looking at the photos and looking at the composition. You know, he was watering my flowers. And then we started sharing about art, and Brother Phap Luu is a wonderful painter. I hope you get a chance to see some of his paintings. In the dining hall, he put, we have the cubbies holes for our bowls, and in his cubby hole, instead of a bowl, he put a oil paint or a pastel painting of his bowl. And it always makes me smile when I see it, because I know my brother's sense of humor. But as I sat there with Brother Phap Luu, I felt, wow, 17 years together on the path. It's like, that's quite something. We're still there on the path. And yeah, I feel so grateful just to have one person like that in our life, to be on the spiritual path together, to still be in robes as a monk after 17 years is quite something. It's not bad. And just to be able to sit like that for a few hours and feel gratitude for that relationship is so precious. And I see that when we talk to one another, we're very aware that we don't want to hurt one another. We don't want to, even though we can joke and play, but there's an awareness. We know, when you're 17 years in robes, you know how much pain can come from just one wrong word. And I think in the past, I was not skillful with my words, sometimes with Brother Phap Luu, and I know he felt hurt. And I know sometimes he knows he was not so skillful with his words, and sometimes I felt hurt. But that's what the relationship is about. A relationship is, at least in my experience, I haven't ever experienced any relationship that didn't have some hurt, where I didn't say something hurtful, where the other person didn't say something hurtful. And so there's something very interesting in that. Like, something in the suffering is building the relationship. So to come back to that phrase, the one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. Inexpressibly perfect. Beyond expression. And yet, as I shared, there is suffering, there is hurt, there is pain. The Buddha called it the first noble truth. I have a lot of microphones in me, so I have to be careful. suffering or ill-being. So the Buddha had this insight looking inside himself. There is suffering. If we only look for happiness in pleasure or in having a good situation, it's very fleeting. We think we get it 1 minute, but then our hand just grasps the thin air. It's gone. So that's not enough. There must be a way to touch a deep and lasting happiness. There has to be a way. The Buddha was determined to find a way to transform his suffering, to look deeply into the roots and see, like, is it possible to transform suffering? To get at the root of the suffering, the second noble truth. The roots of suffering. When we look at the flower, like this orchid, I can see the tree where the ancestors of this orchid lived. If you go to Indonesia, you can see in between the branch and the trunk where the rain collects, the orchid grows. And so for us to enjoy this orchid here in the hall, we have to create that artificial environment for the orchid. So maybe one of the sisters or brothers comes and sprays the orchid, make sure that it has enough moisture but not too much. And we know we have to find the right nutriment so that the orchid can grow into a beautiful flower. And if you come to Deer Park, you can, especially in the Lunar New Year, you might go in the rooms of some of the brothers and sisters and see many old orchids, and we try to nurse them back to life. So we know that if we don't nourish the orchid with the right food, if we don't have enough water or too much water, then suffering arises. The flower starts to wilt and fall, and the new bloom, the new blossom cannot manifest. So even there are conditions for the flower to manifest, but there are not sufficient conditions. And so when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and looked in himself, he saw that there are conditions also for happiness. That is the third noble truth. Conditions for happiness. If we know just the right way to offer enough sunlight, enough shade, enough water, enough nourishment, then happiness can manifest. Before that, he tried to cut off the nutriment, cut off even his own breathing for long periods of time. And he found that his body only suffered. He didn't find happiness. So he decided to change his approach, that he could not overcome suffering by just torturing his body. Sometimes in our relationships, we behave in the same way, not only sometimes towards our body, in the way that we eat. Maybe we stop eating, we think, I cannot control my eating, so I will stop eating, and then our body becomes weak. Or the other way around, we eat too much, and then our body is not healthy. We cannot feel at ease in our body. And the same is true, I see, in our relationships. When we are hurt by someone, there's something in us. It's like we want them, if we're not careful, we want them also to feel our hurt, to acknowledge our pain. And so we make them suffer. We remove the nutriment, and the roots of suffering are manifested. We can listen to a sound of the bell. In the third noble truth, we can also in addition to conditions for happiness, see it as the absence. Of suffering or ill-being. Thay like to say that as practitioners, we are learning to see our non-suffering as happiness. If now you feel some ease in your body, if you can stop and breathe in mindfully, let go of your thinking and just be aware of your body. Even it feels like there's no joy in your body, but there's also the absence of suffering in that moment. There is some neutral feeling. So if we can be aware of that neutral feeling and see it as a source of happiness, that is the insight of the Buddha. Instead of trying to run after some object of desire, either on the internet, in the refrigerator, in our relationships, we go inside and we see, oh, there is a presence of non-suffering in this body. Like the contact of my feet with the bamboo floor right now. It's not a pleasurable feeling, but it's not an unpleasurable feeling. It's just a feeling, a neutral feeling. But when I see it as a neutral feeling, then I can feel gratitude that I can still stand on 2 feet. My 2 legs are in good condition. That is a miracle. I can still balance my body. I'm not going to fall over, hopefully, onto the floor. So a situation as simple as just standing with my feet on the floor becomes a condition for happiness, because I recognize the absence of suffering. In that contact of my feet with the earth, there is a possibility of joy. And so that is how we, as practitioners, learn to transform suffering, to see just neutral feelings in our body, in our feelings, as a source of happiness. And the ways that we do that are the path. The 4th Noble Truth. The path of happiness. If I breathe in and take a step, aware of my feet in contact with the earth, I can feel joy. Just joy to be walking on the earth. There's the sunshine of the sun going down over the mountain. We are all brothers and sisters here. Today, dear Sangha, is the first day that the brothers and sisters are back together after the quarantine. So that is a source of happiness. It's the absence of suffering. There's air to breathe, fresh air from the mountain. And nobody is afraid of getting attacked by anybody, of somebody yelling at them. We feel steady, we feel solid together as brothers and sisters. That is a source of happiness. So recognizing these things, that is the path. We learn to stop our running mind and then recognize that we already have more than enough conditions to be happy in the present moment. I want to share a little bit about an electron. You know, you've probably never seen an electron. And yet, electrons are within you and all around you all the time. And we've learned a lot about electrons in the past 100 years. When I put my hand on this lectern, it's solid. My hand doesn't pass through it. And that might seem obvious. But why is it that my hand doesn't go straight through the lectern, right through the wood? So we've looked deeply into the composition of the wood here. And we understand that because of the molecules that make up this wooden lectern, because of the electrons in the shells of the atoms and the way that they share between the atoms, the electrons, it creates the solidity of this lectern. Most of an atom is space. 99.9% or more of an atom is just space. Not space in the sense that we know it in the macro world, but quantum mechanics is a little bit different. But thanks to the electron, which was formed in the Big Bang billions of years ago, we have the capacity to form bonds, form relationships between atoms, to create solid matter, or even liquid, or even the gas in the atmosphere of this hall. So thanks to the electron and its capacity to be in relationship with other atoms, there is this solidity. It's the repulsion of the negative charge in an electron and the positive charge of the proton. So that relationship is so strong that, try as I might, I cannot move my hand through this piece of wood. And I notice that in my relationships, I can also see that kind of solidity. When I know how to look with the eyes of non-self. I've learned that a lot of my suffering comes from my ideas about myself. We like these things to eat, we have this name, we are good at these things, we are not good at those things. We like to be with these people, we don't like to be with those people. All these ideas are bringing suffering up. And so what I love about the electron is it doesn't have any ideas about itself. Whether it's with this atom or that atom, they're free to move from one to the other, but it creates bond. So no idea about self creates a bond. But as soon as there is some disturbance, like electrons, for example, that have the same spin, they cannot be in the same, they have roughly the same space. They cannot be in the same place. Yeah? They cannot be in the same, they say probability space in quantum mechanics. So if I have this idea about myself and I want to impose it on my loved one, I will suffer and he will suffer, or she will suffer. I bring to the relationship an expectation. You should be like this, or you should not be like that. When instead, if I just let go of my idea about what I want from this relationship and just see it as a precious, perfect communication, then suddenly everything opens up. It's like, wow. The flower, the sprouts come up out of the ground. There's new life, there's new possibility. Thay said that when you are angry at your loved one, imagine them like they are 300 years in the future. They're just a pile of rotted matter, like ashes. And then suddenly you come back to yourself. You come out of your ideas, out of your perceptions, and you see the wondrous reality of that person right there in front of you. So That's what I tried to practice this morning when I had tea with my brother. I see, like 17 years is not a very long time, actually. But he's still here, he's still alive. And I can breathe together with him, I can enjoy tea. And that's already enough. I don't have to have any expectation beyond that. I don't have to think, you are like that, or you have this title, or you are this person. And then something new manifests in that space. So that is what I try to learn from the electron, how to develop a solid relationship that is not based on an idea or a perception, but just on our essential nature. Maybe some of you have seen, recently we watched a documentary in Plum Village on the penguin. I don't know if you've seen this, any documentary on penguins. I was reflecting on the bond and the relationship between a mother and the child. So strong. When the child is born and is brought to the breast of his mother, there's like it's like the very flesh of the mother has manifested as his child. And again, the child doesn't have any idea about its name, or it likes this, it doesn't like that. But right away, when it comes onto the chest of its mother, it feels calm, it feels peace. So in the case of the penguin, the emperor penguin, the mother has to gives almost all of her energy to giving birth to the egg of the baby penguin in the cold of kind of ice field in Antarctica. And so in order to replenish her body, she needs to go back to the sea and hunt for squid and fish. And so the father she has to transfer the egg from the warmth of her, underneath her belly, to the father, very carefully. And then the father stands there for sometimes more than 2 months, keeping the egg warm, knowing that even just a few minutes of that egg being exposed to the cold of the Antarctic weather, that the chick may die. The chick may die inside of the egg. And so during that time, the father penguin can lose more than 20% of its body weight. It learns to shut down most of its organs. This is in the very, very cold time. But keep the egg warm between its feet. And then when the mother comes back, because the penguin has no nest, they're all just out there in the field of ice. The only way for the mother to know where her mate is by the sound of the voice of the other. So there are hundreds of thousands of penguins, and yet somehow in there they can hear that distinct voice. As monastics, we talk about the call of the Buddha. All of us heard a voice that called us to be a monk or a nun. Somebody recently said, if monastics were all a little bit strange. Normally people, they have a relationship, they have children, get married, have a house, and somehow these monks and nuns, they hear some other call. They come to the monastery and they want to stay. Here you can't find a wife or a husband, you can't find a partner. There's no sexual relationship. You have to eat the food that everyone else eats. So you don't get to go and eat whatever food you like. You have to follow the schedule, get up at the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, go to sitting meditation, follow the Sangha. Why would you do that? There must be some kind of strange call. So a little bit like that, I think the call between the father penguin and the mother penguin so that they can find one another. So somehow amongst thousands of penguins, they're able to find each other. And if they are not, then the father will certainly die. He has no more, not enough nutriment in his flesh. And the same is true of the chick. When the chick is born, he is able to call in a way that the mother can hear the voice of her child. And somehow amidst thousands of chicks, of penguins, it can find the mother. That is a kind of miracle, a kind of call. That for me is like the Four Noble Truths. When I first learned these 4 steps, I felt like a calling in my heart. Like something had touched something very deep. Something I'd felt in my life, but I couldn't express. Just like the child somehow knows on the chest of his mother that this is a safe place, this is a refuge. When we really stop and get in touch with our suffering, we think, this is it. All my life I've looked around and I've seen people running after this kind of food, or this kind of job, or this kind of attainment, this kind of degree. And I didn't care about all of that. I didn't care what people call me, what people think I am, or what they don't think I am, what perceptions they have. Actually, I just want to understand the suffering in my heart. I just want to understand what is it there. That is my deep aspiration. And if I can understand that, I can understand my relationship, why I make someone feel hurt. We can come back to our breathing and enjoy the sound of the bell. So dear Sangha, I'd like to share part of a letter that I received during the pandemic. I think in May, I gave a talk and I shared a little bit about my childhood. And it was about also how I had a difficult relationship with one of my schoolmates. It's kind of like a bully. And my dad trained me how to punch. So I shared about that because, and after I suffered for this. I was in the 8th grade, so I suffered for some months. And then finally, when I sat down with that boy and the school psychiatrist, I found out that he was not happy because I had a new haircut. And so I remember the drama of that age of getting a haircut when I had to go and choose from the pictures in America when I was growing up then. You went to the hair salon and you had many pictures, and you could look at the beautiful models and you say, oh, I want to look like that one. And then you think you go in and you get transformed. So anyway, I got a haircut, and then I got punched by a bully, so I shared about that. So this was a letter I received after that talk. So this young man from New Jersey is very touched, and he said, your story about the boyhood haircut and the fight with the bully resonated in a very personal way. I too have been that boy. I too have been targeted that way. As a child, I was quite sensitive, quiet and shy. I remember taking other people's opinions of me very seriously, and I remember the excited tension that came with choosing a new hairstyle, thinking it would mean a new me, thinking I'd be a cooler, more interesting person. Painfully, I also remember being teased and ridiculed for changing my hair or clothes, and I remember lashing back at my aggressors, sometimes physically, only later to be tormented by guilt and sadness at having caused another person pain. My father was a strong man, a lover of sports, especially boxing. When I shared with him that I was sometimes bullied, he showed me how to punch. He taught me where and how to hit. At this later stage of my life, I do not see violence as a solution. I believe it causes more problems. But as a child, I thought I had to fight back to show I could dominate another human. Not only to make the ridicule stop, but to make my father proud. So I began to hold both tension and fear within, feelings that only festered inside me and left me feeling split open in ways I did not fully understand. Similarly to you, I grew into a young man who saw others as the sources of my own and the world's problems. I developed a strong tendency to blame first and ask questions later. I was always looking for conflicts, looking for ways to fight for what I thought was right. The archetype of the rebel, the resistance fighter, the one who struggles against the system, against society, became my model. As you shared in your talk, I know now that all of that angst was nothing more than the scared little boy trying to protect himself by exerting his will upon the world. But before I could reach this level of insight, that confrontational mode of thinking led me into suffering after suffering. I joined the military and served in Afghanistan. I taught with Teach for America. I volunteered in hospitals and even helped with a local charity that distributed books to the homeless. Yet, as I did all these things, I still felt I had something left to prove, some fight still to fight. Even as I took part in these organizations, I often found myself speaking out about how things could be done better. I tried to exert my will even there, and I suffered. Needless to say, after years of living like this, I grew tired and disillusioned. Then I found Old Path White Clouds in a used bookstore. This is the book about the life of the Buddha written by a teacher. Spirituality was not foreign to me. I have a degree in theology. But never in my life had I encountered a truth so clear, so authentic, and so real as the story of the Buddha Thich Nhat Hanh presented in his book. From there, I began to research Plum Village and to listen to the Dharma. I started to build a daily practice and learn more about ancient Buddhism. I read books about Zen, about Bodhidharma, and various sutras. However, it is the teachings of Master Thich Nhat Hanh and those of his monastics that I find the most clear, the most true, and the most practically accessible. The daily practice of sitting and walking meditation has enabled me to, as you said, learn to breathe and begin to let go of my fear, my anger, my anxiety about life, and being underappreciated. This time of pandemic has enabled me to look into myself deeply and to recognize again that I am at best a steward of this body, and that illness and death are not so scary. My negative emotions are still present, of course, but the practice has helped me develop a spirit of inclusiveness towards the whole of myself. This attitude has eased my suffering so much so that I am able to recognize the unity that exists between myself and all the societal ills I once fought against. Ultimately, this development of inclusiveness has helped me transform much of my pain by shining the light of mindfulness into the dark corners of myself. Because of Plum Village, I feel very strongly that I am on the path to becoming a realized practitioner. So, dear Sangha, in this new year, we want to have that kind of deep aspiration to transform suffering and bring happiness into our life. So what we propose today is that we sit down and we write a letter like this to ourselves. I really appreciate the insight of this young man. When we're able to look inside and stop the fighting, stop the violence towards ourselves and towards others, then happiness is already there. And that is it's very difficult, actually. If we're not careful, we're fighting all the time. We're fighting to go inside or to go outside. We're fighting with our own will, whether we open the refrigerator and get some sweet food, candy bar or a piece of pizza, or we don't do it. But if we look and see that we already have enough, just like he shared here, we embrace with mindfulness every aspect of our being. We see that in this body, there is already the solidity. There's the stability of all the molecules in my body. I can take refuge in that solidity. Even when things outside are uncertain, even when there's the pandemic, there's the virus, even when there's so much fear, racism, discrimination around me, I know I can come back and take refuge in the electrons in my body. They're still stable. There's stable covalent bonds in my body. I can take refuge in that. I can come back to myself and I can see that there's a deep call that I hear when I hear the Four Noble Truths. There's something inside me that wakes up that's not limited to this lifetime, that's not limited to this body, that's not limited to my idea about myself. And when I touch that, there's solidity, there's stability. And then from that place, what I think, what I say, no longer nourishes the roots of suffering. Not in myself and not in the other person, not in my beloved one. So even if when we listen to our loved one, we hear hurtful words, even when that person yells at us, they tell us how much we've made them suffer, I can come back to that stability. I can come back to that place of peace. I cannot allow myself to get caught up in that suffering. I can touch compassion and understanding, but I don't get carried away. I don't get in the wheel of suffering. In that relationship, I learn to stop, touch something solid inside of me. If it helps, you can get the pebble. And we teach the children to pick up a pebble and to touch the mountain in the pebble, so that they can learn to get in touch with the mountain in themselves, a solid place of stability. And we need that solidity in this coming year. We need to have solid practitioners, because there's a lot of hatred and violence still there in the hearts of people. So in this, in a few minutes, we will begin a walking meditation. And if you haven't already done so, at home we encourage you to take a moment with a piece of paper and to come back to that place of solidity in your heart and write down your deep aspiration for this coming year. What is it that you want to realize in your practice? And you don't have to wait. You can start practicing it right away. As soon as you write it down, while you're writing it down. And we will practice walking meditation together. Thay Phap Luu will lead us. And then we will come back here to the outside of the meditation hall, and together we will burn our aspirations, our paper with our deep aspiration, just like the young man who learned to transform his pain and his need to change the world outside of himself and instead come home. So we'll burn that aspiration, and the brothers and sisters will chant the name of the Bodhisattva of compassion. And then we'll have a short break, and at 7:30 Pacific time, or a little bit before then, we invite you to connect with us again on Zoom, and we'll have the ceremony of wishing, offering our deep aspiration as a collective community to the whole world and to our community. And we'll try to post that New Year prayer on the website, so you can also follow along as we combine our deep aspiration to transform a situation of suffering that has continued until today. And it's possible to be happy. It's possible to wake up. Thank you, dear Sangha, for your deep practice, and I wish you a happy new year. And soon we hope we can meet again here at Deer Park and climb the mountain together and enjoy the call of the coyotes together. Thank you for your deep practice, and may you bring happiness and joy to your relationships wherever you are.